and action. Hey everyone, Pat had a question about leaky gut. And leaky gut is such a huge topic that I never wanted to really approach it. I'd take it in the form of IBS or probiotic use, but in case this is the first time you're finding me before we get into this topic, don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you think this helps you, and pass it along to other people too. Also the alert button to find out when I do new videos. And I usually do a video depending on the patient's majority of the questions throughout the day. I might throw in a video depending on who asks what, or if there's a resounding recurrent question. So leaky gut. Leaky gut, essentially, that's a non-doctor diagnosis. What do I mean by that is I think a lot of people, when a lot of the general public have enough symptoms and doctors just say, no, it's nothing, we checked, there's nothing going on, but yet you're suffering, yet you're not dying, then there's names that are put to the things in the general public, and sometimes a name or a diagnosis makes you feel more like, okay, I got something, it's not just in my head. Although a placebo effect or nocebo effect is very powerful. But anyway, leaky gut, if you wanted to take that into ICD-9 or a medical office diagnosis, there is something called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth that does exist, or small intestinal increased permeability. Those words don't mean anything, it just makes it a worthwhile visit that's legal to the insurance company if you come in and see a doctor for something of bloating, difficulty with digestion, reflux, diarrhea, constipation, very sensitive hypersensitive reactions to normal things that you shouldn't have. So those are simply what happens when your gut is not just absorbing its fuel sources from the solid food that you eat, but it also absorbs too much. This is something you put in the base. I put this in the sink right next door when I'm cleaning out my teapot. I have to get some of the old tea leaves out, and if I send all the old tea leaves down the drain, it'll eventually clog up. So this is supposed to catch tea leaves. So this filter is supposed to work, and it's supposed to. I should be able to wash out my teapot and then throw all the stuff as catches, and we're good. Now, if this doesn't catch because it has bigger holes in it, if I don't use this at all, and I just clean out my teapot, the tea leaves, everything from the previous brew will head down the drain, and then it's going to be a problem. Imagine if you're taking a fuel source in from a multitude of different countries, and from different foods, meats, vegetables, nuts, legumes, seeds, beverages, and you take so much stuff in that your gut that is supposed to be filtering around bad stuff, it can't filter. It just allows everything. Well, some of the stuff either will be poisonous to you, like a kid with a peanut allergy, or somebody with lactose insufficiency getting dairy that they didn't know about, or a poison like a parasite, or a heavy metal that's in a lead-lined pot that somebody made your food in. If all that stuff gets in and the gut can't filter out and send it on down into the toilet, then it goes right through the filter, which is the lining of the small intestine. It goes right through from the inside lumen where the food is being digested to the bloodstream. And then once in the bloodstream, that poison to you, whether it's a true poison like lead, arsenic, mercury, or whether it's an irritant to you, you just get massive amounts of it if you eat the wrong thing, goes into the bloodstream and heads straight for the liver. Once it's in the liver, your liver can kind of work to detoxify, neutralize, but if it gets overwhelmed, it can't do anything, and that thing just goes everywhere. It goes into your brain, goes into your muscles, goes into your joints, it goes into your your glands. So then you have brain fog, you have joint pain, you have skin rashes, you have problems with underactive thyroid, you have autoimmune disease, you have palpitations, you have all these symptoms that shouldn't be there. And I know that there's some doctors who say that, well, they don't believe in leaky gut per se, and then some of my colleagues will see somebody that comes in with all those symptoms, plus brain fog and joint pain and palpitations, and say, well, all our tests are normal, so you just have depression or you just have anxiety. And I think that's such a cop-out. So this talk is going to be more on, if you know about what happens, maybe you can empower yourself to initiate a rebuild phase. That's what we're doing with Pat. So we're trying to, after he gets his colonoscopy, Pat, after you get your colonoscopy, hopefully you do fine. But since a colonoscopy requires you to fast and clean out the colon, this is going to be considered your detox. So once everything is cleaned out and you're going to be at least on a liquid diet for 24 to 48 hours, I'd say once we get a good clean bill of health, let's restart this thing. So how do we restart it? Well, we try to rebuild. The first thing after getting a good clean bill of health is we try to stay away from any further damage. So the problem with leaky gut is that because massive amounts of things get in, including your true fuel source. Remember, I told you in the beginning, food is fuel. And you need food for fuel to have every cell work properly. Well, sometimes when you're hunting for fuel, carbohydrates, if you want to break it down to carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, and then minerals, sometimes you have to work with that because certain fuels will get you way too juiced up. For example, if you take something that's got heavy carbohydrate, your body might be so used to carbohydrates that it sends a lot of carbohydrates from your fuel, but it also sends a lot of insulin. So that when the insulin spikes, it controls you, as I've done in my insulin and diabetes lectures, but it also drops you down because the insulin spiked, it's also going to drop. And then you're going to be very hypoglycemic. You're going to be shaky, tired, crabby, hunting for fuel sources again. So we have to be careful about restarting a new healthy diet. So definitely stay away from crappy food. You really have to stay into the whole food approach. That means you make it. Now it's going to be a pain in the ass because if you don't cook, you have to learn how to cook too. In addition to getting a colonoscopy, well, that's two tasks. So what I've done, I've become vegan, but what I've done is I'm still learning how to cook. But there's a lot of places out there, yes, you're going to spend extra money, but there's a lot of places out there that'll kind of prepare your food for you. And there are some services that you can order up beforehand and they'll send you kind of a pre-prepared meal. You just have to heat up. So there are, Seattle Sutton's an oldie, but a goodie, Jenny Craig, I believe. And there's other ones that are out there. Or you can just go to Mariano's or Whole Foods, and depending on which one's around you, you might be able to find something that's prepared pretty decently. It's nice because they have other ethnicities from around the world. You might be able to try or sample without any fear that there's parasites or other unknown ingredients that you're not safe with yet. So whole food, mostly plant-based diet would be number one. Number two, you have to stay away from dairy. Now, if you have no filter and you take in something like a dairy product, ice cream, milk, that's cow milk, not almond milk, flaxseed milk, or soy milk. Cow milk, maybe even goat milk, yogurt, creamer, all those things from a cow, they come from a cow. And a cow technically is so heavy with steroids and antibiotics. I'd really be careful about what you get. I'd stay away from a cow because so many people have dairy issues anyway, whether it's you're lactose insensitive or you're just really lactose deficient and you can't even tolerate it. I'd stay away from dairy. So just for now. I'd also stay away from very difficult to process heavy meats, thick meats, red meat, spicy foods, the dairy like I mentioned, the irritants like coffee and alcohol, anything with high caffeine, anything with spicy food. Unfortunately, these are all the great things, but if we're going to try to reset this gut, you got to give it some time to heal. Some people would actually go on a fasting diet, and I think it's reasonable. I'd stay away from citrus too, because citrus has high acidity and it hurts sometimes. So I'd stay away from any irritants. And you might consider doing food allergy tests because maybe the irritable gut or the leaky gut is because you're imbibing a substance that you're genetically predisposed to have an allergic reaction to. So allergy testing, though, is very expensive. It might give you direction, but it is expensive and not all insurance has coverage. So if you have the privilege of having a good insurance, you might want to get that. I think ultimately having somebody to guide you and work with you week by week would be important to build up. But definitely, number one, do no further harm. Number two, you might want to start something to help lining the small intestine and large intestine again with mucus. So what do I mean? You're supposed to have a biofilm. There's a thin layer of slippery mucus that lines the small intestine and the large intestine. And it's mucousy, it's slippery. You actually have to have that in the lining of the stomach too. But we often irritate the lining of the digestive system so that there's no more mucus formed. And that is actually protective, acts as a barrier, also a filter of sorts. In addition to, it's a house for your probiotic. So if you're doing, and we'll talk about that in a second, but if you're going to take a probiotic, which you should take, whether it's in food form, like kimchi, yogurt, pickled foods, or it's in just a probiotic capsule or liquid, you need a house for the bacteria to stay in, and that's going to be the mucus layer. That's technically your prebiotic. So I think there's a shortcut to doing that. Orthomolecular has something called mucosagen, pretty good anti-inflammatory, has a little bit of turmeric, L-glutamine, skullcap, and a couple other things. And you can take 2 capsules twice a day, reline. And now the problem, reline your gut, but the problem is if you already have a phlegmy cough or a stuffy nose, you might find that giving yourself mucus in the colon and small intestine will also give you mucus up here, so watch yourself, especially if you're a smoker. And you shouldn't be a smoker anyway. Well, I think I've done a video on tobacco cessation, but I don't want to go off track here. So important for prebiotic. There's also Inflamex. I'll see if I can find some links down below. That is kind of like a vitamin supplement powder, pretty inert, with a couple of things, again, like L-glutamine. L-glutamine is such a great building block for re-establishing the lining. The problem with, again, the problem with the lining of the small intestine and large intestine is that the filter doesn't work and you have big porous holes so anything gets through. So if anything gets through, you want to close up the lining so that it's very selective on what is allowed to get through. And that's where L-glutamine is helpful. There's scientists who found that zonulin, which is supposed to be an anchor between 2 cells, zonulin is supposed to get the cells together. And sometimes the cells you're missing zonulin, and there's a way to improve it, but again, we pulled together the filter so the filter works better. You're supposed to allow certain things through and then block everything else, certain things through and block everything else. That's the function of a good small intestinal lining, but those villi, once they've been irritated and they don't have that mucus layer, so get that mucus layer going. Do no further harm, get the mucus layer going. Once the mucus layer, it usually takes about 30 to 60 days, is built up again, then you can start your probiotic. And as far as which probiotic, I like the work of Justin Sonnenberg. I'll put a link down below. But I choose a probiotic from the refrigerated section of a health food store. I like Fruit for Yield myself. I've been to Whole Foods. But if you ever go to these places, they've got refrigerators full of different probiotics, all in different specials, different amounts, different billion CFUs. Different bacterias. So you have to kind of pick and choose. The spored probiotics, I think, are bulletproof to damage in the gut, but they're expensive. I just choose a probiotic, stick to it, continue it, and then switch every 3 months. Because the way it works is, if you've got a good layer of mucus in the small intestine, large intestine, when you introduce a probiotic, you might keep, if there's like 5 different species of bacteria in there, a little bit of lacto, a little bit of bifido, a little bit of Saccharomyces, you might keep 3, and then the gang that builds up will be locked in. It's pretty cool. Justin Sonnenberg and a couple other doctors have come up with different bacteria work in the daytime, different bacteria work at night. It's so cool the way the gut works. And it does help with calming down inflammation. Different bacteria help with digesting certain foods. Different bacteria require different fibers to eat, so that's why you have to have a wide plethora of different plants to feed the gut bacteria. That's why I think that the keto patients, I admire some keto patients when they lose weight, but if you're doing full keto and not doing any carbs, not doing any fiber, you're going to not feed these probiotics, and there's going to be a problem sooner or later. So I do think we need fiber. So if you are a keto practitioner, fine, as long as you're getting benefit out of it, but somehow get that fiber in. So probiotics, you switch every 3 months, you find a new one and you stick with it. And you have to jot down, keep a journal, because you might forget 6 months ago that you tried this one and it didn't work, or it gave you bloating, or some other ingredient in the probiotic didn't work with you. So always keep a journal, which is the next thing is you got to keep a journal of the food sources, because the gut, as you're rebuilding this thing, the leaky gut, when you rebuild it, can take up to a year to 2 years to get back into the stride. And you might have forgotten that, okay, can't have apples from Maine, or I can't have potatoes from South America. So you should keep a journal somewhere. And computer systems, you can do that and just keep a tally. What's good, what's bad, and keep on adding or subtracting to that depending. Maybe, hopefully, eventually, you'll strike everything and say, I can tolerate anything in a year. So that's the ultimate. And if you can't, then that's what you have to hire a coach. Registered dietitians who are very gifted, nutritionists and life coaches who don't necessarily go through the registered dietitian path, but they're still very good with having to take care of multitude of clients and having good experience. But for me to just say what you can and can't eat in one visit, which average doctor visit's about 15 minutes, impossible. I'm going to shortcut that and we'll lose. So you really have to hire a functional medicine kind of practitioner. There's a bunch of them around. You just have to search them out. Or you can get that expensive food allergy test and then know exactly what you can and can't have. And even if you have an allergy or a sensitivity to a food, there are certain foods that you might not have an allergy or sensitivity to, but they just have to be avoided because they're irritating. And I mentioned that already. So the next thing I would do is you have to start getting your timing in. So you can't, when we're resetting this gut, because the digestive enzymes in there, if you are taking them, it's okay. If you're not taking digestive enzymes, hopefully your pancreas is working and your liver is working properly to secrete the digestive enzymes when you introduce food into your stomach. But you have to do it on a regular basis, just like you have to sleep, and you can't train extra muscle to build without proper sleep. Well, you can't reintroduce the colon and the small intestine into digesting properly without proper sleep and without proper timing. So you have to schedule your visits to the kitchen, to the meals. You have to eat at a certain time, and it has to be 2 or 3 times a day or twice a day. But it has to be that routine for a long time. Try not to vary that, and try not to go off course, because it might be tempting when you're at a party, say, I'm going to have a beer, it's just one beer. I always hear that, it's just one beer. Somebody today came in to see me, said the diet pill I gave them helped them lose 20 pounds. And it was the holiday eating that made them gain 20 pounds. Well, we shouldn't be doing that. So you have to really be careful, because sometimes one slip up and then you're on your road to being bad again or feeling lousy. Because leaky gut, you'll feel lousy. Again, brain fog, joint pain, skin rashes, underactive thyroid, autoimmune disease, all these things will happen, bloating. So we don't want that. There's nothing like waking up with a bloat or walking around with a bloat all day. It causes back pain, your stomach's distended, you can't tighten up the rectus abdominis, then your back hurts. And what good is that? You just walk around in pain, and then when you go see the doctor, who'll give you medicines, a ton of them. I mean, we have GI specialists who can give you a lot of medicines if that's what we need for very extreme presentations, but I guarantee you one thing, you'll have side effects of all those medicines, because again, you have leaky gut. So the medicine's gonna get in excessively high. So you gotta be really careful. And with the routine of the introduction of your eating pattern, there has to be a little bit of exercise, but not too much, because as I mentioned, you're gonna kind of narrow down your food intake. So we just use as little as possible, as little irritating food as possible, but then you're gonna be decreasing your fuel sources. And if you're used to exercise and we decrease the fuel source, you're going to hit the wall with activity or get injured. So plan on decreasing your activity as well. Not 100%. It's always good to exercise because it gets the heart pumping properly, and if the heart is pumping, then the small intestine and the muscles get their due blood supply. So you have to have a regular activity. You have to have regular meal exposure. You have to have good sleep, and you have to have everything else I mentioned. So finally, when you get to a plateau of some sort, don't forget a calming practice, because stress, you'll be able to get to a plateau and just float for a while. That's that float phase I talk about, until the next either attempt at another summit or until the next hit of a medical disease or a sickness. And then you usually will go downhill a little bit, but don't fear. Hopefully you'll stop not go downhill all the way and then get yourself back up. You'll see that your injury times will shorten. Your sick times will shorten, and you'll see it. You're not going to eliminate everything, but hopefully you'll be back to where you were when you were 20, if health was good back then and weight was good back then. But that's what we want. We don't. All my 50-year-olds come in with so many medicines that it's the new millennial disease. You have multiple diseases, not all dangerous, but just all accumulated, and it's just a terrible life. So what I wanted to do with Patrick is get him on the road to improvement. Pat, hopefully you're listening. This is my plan for you, and it'll always change. It'll change with the season, what's available at the grocery, the income, what happens medically. So hang in there, just start planning for the long run. And everybody else, if you have your own suggestions on things that have helped with Band-Aids, like supplements, DGL is a good one. Sometimes certain digestive enzymes are good. Certain places to buy foods. You always have to learn about EWG's Dirty Dozen and Clean 15. Or a diet practice, please put them down. I think other people are willing to listen. And don't forget to subscribe and pass this along to other people who may be suffering. Patrick, we'll get this thing taken care of. Just hang in there, be patient, start planning this out, and we'll see how things go.